Hello and welcome back to our special weekend review with my guests here. We're talking about, of course, what happened in court in the Isle of Man this last week. But I know we're trying to get into sections. We might drift all over the place, but you're keen to bring the Minister up as a subject matter. This is Lawrie Hooper, Minister for Health, who couldn't tell me the other week anything. He couldn't even tell me what it was about. I mean, nothing. I mean...
Well, he could.
What he didn't say much, did he?
What he did say, I can tell you nothing, but it's the media's fault. I mean, that was an extraordinary thing to say. But I have been nothing short of absolutely astonished by the Minister of Health's conduct, behaviour throughout this whole thing. And I just want to take those who aren't familiar with this right back to square one, into the last administration. Two things. First of all, Lawrie Hooper was on the Public Accounts Committee with me when I invited Dr. Rosalind Ranson to give evidence to the PAC to explain and outline her deep concerns. This, for me, started way back May of last year, when any reasonable and rational person would say, what on earth is going on at Abbotswood? That's where it started. So Lawrie Hooper was fully engaged in the PAC. He signed off the report on Rosalind Ranson's treatment, so he knew intimately the really difficult situation she was in, extraordinarily difficult situation. And the second point I would start off with is that Lawrie Hooper, and we'll deal with this hopefully in the last part of today's programme, Lawrie Hooper, when I got Tynwald to set up the Constitutional, Legal and Justice Committee, Lawrie Hooper sat on that with me. And we dealt in that first year, because it came into being quite late in the last house, into being in the last house. And the two things we majored on really were legal services, which Andrew will be well aware of the work that the committee did. And secondly, expressing concern about the AG's department. So, bear that in mind, after the election, Lawrie was appointed Minister of Health, and at the time of his appointment, Dr. Rosalind Ranson was still in post. Lawrie Hooper chose not to speak to his Director of Medicine when she was in post, knowing all that he knew. He just kept his distance from it completely. I remember at one stage, I think I passed Lawrie in the street and I said, Lawrie, what is this? Why are you not engaged? He said, waving his hand aside, he said, this is an employment tribunal, it's nothing to do with me. And I thought, Lawrie, you know better than that. You know full well that this goes deep beneath, as it were. And of course, history has shown that to be the case because it's caused ructions throughout government. Lawrie knew that, but he chose to keep his distance from it. Then when he ultimately got to the evidence session with the tribunal, where he personally gave evidence, you will recall that the Dr. Rosalind Ranson's legal representative had to caution Lawrie Hooper to stop laughing because the matter was so serious. And then we have, later on, we have this appeal process. Now, he came to you and said, oh, I can't speak about this. All right, he was there for another reason, but nonetheless, he couldn't even tell you what the appeal was about, hiding behind the concept of sub judice. When you asked him, did he authorise this? He said, well, technically, yes, it was a departmental matter. But look, he was a minister. He must have known intimately what was in that appeal, and he allowed it to go forward. And that, to me, describes a man who is running away from his responsibilities right the way through the whole matter. And I hold that as somebody who's been a minister and understands, like every member should, the trust which is endowed in an elected member. He had a duty of care, and he's just run away from it.
Well, you called for his head on a very early interview after it started.
Because of what I knew behind all of this idea that he's an innocent party not engaged in it is just not the case. And I'm disgusted about it.
He's done a tweet asking to make sure the media cover this whole thing in full, which I thought was quite bizarre because we were certainly there. There's more media there than ever. But
but he knew what was in that appeal, and covering it in detail just simply showed that the appeal was a waste. It was not addressing the detail any more than it could of the tribunal itself. It was a technicality on where the tribunal's authority lay and didn't lie. I mean, why would he pretend that it was anything more than that? But he seemed to. If you listen to what he said, well, the media should be there and you will understand the effectively one got the impression, the strength of the case, etc. But no, none of that happened. And it just begs the question, where on earth is Lawrie's head on all of this?
Andrew, what do you think?
Two things. First of all, something that Chris has picked up in there, so valuable, and something that we should never forget about this. On the other side of this case is an individual who's suffered, and the tribunal in their judgment of 9th of May, 202-page judgment, many times throughout the judgment highlighted that the persecution that apparently seems to be going on Dr. Ranson in terms of the suffering that she's had from health and issues, and that she hasn't been able to work now, and she's got this huge expensive litigation going on for her. And again, this case yesterday, the department decided to bring that. There'll be costs incurred in that. And Dr. Ransom, the costs were not decided yesterday, but the standard rule is costs follow the event. And I think the advocate for the department accepted that would be the case, but there'll be a negotiation about that and a conclusion by the court. But Dr. Ranson, she won't be able to recover 100% of her costs from that, and that's never the case. So she will have suffered even because of this appeal. Even though she won, she's still going to suffer some costs. So yeah, an individual is suffering here, and so then the second point about the Minister Hooper. I mean, I was surprised to see his public tweet yesterday, stating that the media, he was looking forward to the media reporting, but that he was looking forward to the media reporting everything that took place, or the whole story was his term, but he said he would be waiting a long time. He thought he would be waiting a long time for that. I don't know, rightly or wrongly, implication that the media wouldn't be reporting the whole story and that there would be something else left out, and this was some kind of media witch hunt then against the department. And I would invite Minister Hooper, to then express what he thinks is the whole story.
I did ask him if he wanted to chair today, yeah.
And his lawyers were in court, and I'm sure he would have received a report from his lawyers. Yeah. So as to what he thought were the whole story, I'm interested to know, given that I was in court and I was able to witness Deemster Corlett's judgment on the issue.
Okay, so
I think you were suggesting there, Andrew, I think that he was referring to the broader story as well, in terms of the tribunal's judgment and what lay behind that. But doesn't this sound just a little bit like David Ashford's point-by-point rebuttal that never appeared? This idea that actually Mr. Hooper's cognizant of matters which haven't come into the public, which he's knowledgeable about that nobody else is. That's just pure smoke and mirrors, and needs to be dispatched. The point is that the tribunal, incidentally, we spoke well of the court yesterday and the day before, but so we should talk well of the tribunal, because that was a magnificent piece of work that the tribunal produced. Was it 800 paragraphs? Yeah. Was it? Extraordinary piece of work. And again, that should give members of the public comfort. But the nub of this, broadening this out, is look how difficult it was for Dr. Rosalind Ranson to get to this point. The cost, the effort, the personal toll upon her in this whole matter. And the public will think about all of this and say, well, goodness me, is that what it takes to get justice when your employer is government?
And sorry, Chris, this is the point I want to stray onto. I don't know if we're going to save it for part 3. But access to justice, and I can deal with it now.
Yeah.
So should we go on then and see what happens?
I know. What do you think? I mean, we're going to do the AGs in the third part.
Well, Andrew, you crack on. Yeah.
So access to justice in terms of Dr. Rosalind Ranson. Fortunately, she had a legal team and she had the resources. Presumably, I don't know how she's funding that. But it's going to be very expensive, and what we saw yesterday is only going to add to that expense. But she's unfortunately in that position, and this is why this case is so important, because and I stress because there's been no conclusion on these issues yet, and this disclosure hearing will discuss them and conclude on them hopefully next week and in the future. If there has been foundation to what was put in the judgment on the 9th of May in terms of the allegations maybe, or the implications around concoction of documents, destroyed documents that were intentionally held back and only disclosed later, if that's all gone on and that has foundation, then that really goes to the heart of the administration of justice in the Isle of Man. And so Dr. Ranson had the resources to fight this case, but so many others might have been in the same position without the resources.
Have been.
Yeah.
And no doubt there was attempts, I mean, again, only surmising, but normally in these things, there's a gagging order, quite often, offered a bit of money and please walk away to the sunset. But she wasn't going to take the sunset. She wanted her day in court. I mean, again, I'm surmising, but that's how it's looking, isn't it?
Well, what I actually attended, I don't know whether you did, Andrew, I actually attended as much as, and so did you, as much of the tribunal hearing as one could. And at the outset, when the AGs, as it were representing DHSC at that point, the strong impression I got was an AG's department that was complacent and pretty well ill-informed, and actually was used to finding itself in this position. And it begs a lot of questions, this whole matter of the power and of the AG's department, the finance government has, the pressure that they bring to bear on individuals who stand alone when they're seeking justice, and how incredibly difficult it is for them to achieve it. And it was only because Rosalind Ranson, with the support of the BMA financially, was able to challenge this, that the curtains have been drawn aside, and we've seen how government behaves to its in certain circumstances to some employees who choose to stand against it. Now, let me just draw a parallel between, for example, I spent much of my life in the private sector, and so we used industrial relations if there was an issue between ourselves and a member of staff, and we always did everything we possibly could to resolve it internally, but it was written into the terms and contract of employment that if ultimately we couldn't arrive at agreement, we mutually together on a level playing field would place our cases before the industrial relations tribunal, and they would then adjudge, and we would both have to accept that. So we sat there equally together. No extra finance, no extra legal support. Okay, very low level. You look at the situation and a government employee's in. How can they end up finding themselves on a level playing field when all the power and authority of government falls behind, as it were, suppressing that individual's rights?
And on that point, the David and Goliath point, the individual, the employee of maybe a government department or a private body, they're facing a big employer who might have deep pockets and can run litigation and what we might call bleed the opponent, and then you might get unfair outcomes where someone is denied justice because they don't have the funding. In the UK, in the employment tribunal in the UK, if a whistleblower brings a whistleblowing claim, if they bring it within the time frame, an application for interim relief, they can get the employer to carry on paying them like they're still employed while they're bringing their claim. And that's obviously an incentive for the employer dealing with things quickly.
But that's not the case here, you say?
No, that's not the case. There was a consultation on whistleblowing that ended yesterday. In that, there was a question relating to this and whether it should come in the Isle of Man. But I would invite and encourage our MHKs to really raise this in the House of Keys and also in Tynwald as something that should happen now. There should be this access because what we've got in the Ranson case and, as Chris has alluded to, other cases, I'm sure, where you've got unfair balancing exercises, David and Goliath scenarios, and you've got an individual who maybe has legal rights but can't get them to court or tribunal to be heard because they don't have the funding.
You see, the AG's department is big and powerful, and you might recall, I'm sure you do, that there was a report on the AG's department by Steve Wooler around about a decade ago.
Yeah.
And I saw the full transcript. I don't know whether it ever came to light, but it was a very, I'm going to use gentle words, it was a very, very robust report, very critical. And a number of the things that were recommended in that report to, as it were, rebalance the AG's department hasn't happened. I mean, there are a whole area of issues, and I want to go on about this because...
Should we do AGs in the third, please?
Okay, go on.
Because I still want to go back to Lawrie Hooper, because that's what we're trying to start on this one.
Enough.
Because he's signed off on this. I mean, has to be the case, right? To go to court, to do whatever you want to call it the other day, someone has to sign off on it. Now, would that be Lawrie Hooper as the minister, or would it become from the chief minister, or would this be a Coleman decision? I mean, would you not know that exact detail?
Well, no. Well, I would know because Lawrie told you that he signed it off. That's what he said. Yeah. And it is his duty. The way our structure works, it falls upon the minister in these circumstances to initiate the action, and he is the one that should therefore know all about it. I put it to you earlier that he did know all about it, but yet he sort of exhibits innocence and detachment, which is grossly irresponsible and inappropriate for a minister to do.
There's costs involved in this.
What, the appeal or the whole thing?
Well, let's just do this week's proceedings. There's a lot of costs involved, right? I mean,
the costs in the main part of it, as we will come to find, presumably in January, will be of a significant magnitude.
But the costs just yesterday and the day before don't just come from nowhere. Someone's picking up the tab. Does that come out of the DHSC budgets, do you think? I mean,
it comes from the tax. Ultimately, it's the taxpayer who pays. Yes.
So somebody could have got a hip joint thing, for the money. I'm just trying to say that money could be used for better purposes than what it was this week. That's how I see it. Anyway, I don't know what you think. I mean, was it worth this whole
the question was it clearly on examination before it was submitted or signed off, was it worth the money that it might ultimately cost? And the answer has got to be clearly, for any rational, reasonable person, no, it wasn't. Yeah. So why did it happen?
And will we ever know that? And will we ever find out how much money has been paid for yesterday?
Well, we touched on the why earlier on, which was obfuscation and delay. And I think you used a phrase, presumably in legal terms, is bleeding out the case, effectively.
Yeah, and
the claimant.
That may be a litigation tactic that's employed by some others to kind of bleed your opponent, war of attrition, and that's bringing applications without merit. I'm not saying whether or not the government's application had merit. I haven't seen the legal advice they may have received from their advisors to say, yes, you should bring this appeal because it has merit. It has a success rate of above 50%, and therefore we think there are good grounds to bring that appeal. I haven't seen that advice, but I can only go on what Deemster Call It determined. And although he hasn't stated that the appeal was totally without merit or doomed to failure, and these are language language these are terms that he would use at the cost level to determine. There was a debate yesterday whether there would be indemnity costs or standard costs. Indemnity costs are awarded when an appeal has been brought without any merit, where it's doomed to failure, where it should never have been brought, and we might hear Deemster Call uttering those phrases in the future if it gets to that stage. These are terms that the lawyers for Dr. Ranson used yesterday. Mr. Russell from Brighton Halsall, he stood up and said this appeal had no merit, it should never have been brought, and therefore my client should be awarded indemnity costs, which is like a higher level of costs. Sorry, I've escaped from your original.
It's all right. No, we're wrapping this
really.
section up. Then, but it's really interesting to be honest. See, you're just Green Party and lawyer. Just so you know, this thing might miss a match. Anything on more in this section before we tackle the AGs? Because, and again, I'm going to say it just incredible as I see it, and people are seeing it, that this got this far when it, as you say, it could have been seen it was doomed from the word go, but they want to bring it forward. They went through the whole process and sat there, and I'm sure we also heard about various other, leading up to the other day, there were being court issues, but of course they hadn't been reported probably because there aren't court reporters anymore to cover that sort of
thing. And just on that point, which you raised earlier, and I think and Chris raised as well, which is really fundamental as well, is the Attorney General's just a piggy bank for the government in terms of where is the accountability?
We'll do that. We'll come back.
Sorry,
that's all right. It's a good build-up. Watch part 3 with us here and my guest talking about this proceedings that have been going on this week in the Isle of Man.